Hello, welcome to It's Not Your Money, real talk about achieving racial equity in philanthropy, hosted by Camelback Ventures. These slightly irreverent but honest conversations feature leaders challenging the status quo plaguing philanthropy today, and those who are demonstrating how we can collectively build a more equitable and just funding landscape, particularly for organizations and businesses led by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, women, and non-binary founders. I'm Jessamyn Shams-Lau, Senior Advisor to the Capital Collaborative at Camelback Ventures, and your host today. I spent over a decade leading a California Family Foundation, advocating for philanthropy with humility, and also co-authored the book Unicorns Unite: How Nonprofits and Foundations Build Epic Partnerships. And today, I am super excited to talk with one of my co-authors and the OG nonprofit unicorn, Vu Le. Vu started to use the moniker unicorn to describe all the mythical, magical social change leaders out there. Vu is the writer of the Nonprofit AF blog, a co-founder and co-leader of Community Centric Fundraising, and part of numerous other organizations and projects. He was previously executive director of Rainier Valley Corps, a social justice organization focused on supporting leaders of color, strengthening organizations led by and serving communities of color, and fostering collaboration among diverse communities. Vu, welcome. Please tell our audience a little bit more about yourself.
Hey, Jessamyn, thank you so much for having me. I am Vu, I use him pronouns. I'm in Seattle, which is on Duwamish and Coast Salish land. I'm an Asian immigrant. I've been in the sector for a while now, which is why I have all the wrinkles and gray hair. And I have two small children who are wonderful, and a lot of work.
A lot of work and a lot of joy. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Ruth, thank you for being here today. Super appreciate your time and your expertise. And before we dive into your work, Vu, I would love for us to just quickly talk about language. So one of the reasons that this series is called It's Not Your Money is because we have a habit in philanthropy of incorrectly labeling the money in foundations and donor advice funds as still belonging to the founders who created the organizations or were the impetus for the organizations. And when we label the money that way, we also act like the money still belongs to them, which then perpetuates this concentration of power. So words are super important. And so aside from using the Oxford comma, which any nonprofit AF readers will know you are an impassioned advocate of, what other shift in language do you think we need to make to help us advance equity and justice in the world?
Yeah, I would really want us to shift away from the sort of language of gratitude that we've been trained on. You know, like as fundraisers, we've been trained like you need to be grateful to all your donors, and you need to treat them like heroes. And we use language like, because of you, this happened, or we couldn't have done this without you, etc. And I think over decades, it really caused us to believe all these things that we're saying when we talk to donors and funders. And I think that this, in many ways, is very harmful because it allows donors and funders to not think about where their wealth came from, for example, because they're constantly being thanked. And they're constantly thinking that, yes, they are a hero, that they are out there rescuing people and making the world better. When the reality is that so much of the issues we're trying to address are caused by the hoarding of wealth in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So I also don't like this sort of like, there's only so much money to go around sort of language. Like, no, that's a lie. There's tons of money. It's just like, there's like over $1 trillion just sitting in endowments and donor advice funds, because foundations are only required to give out 5% every year in the US, right? I think in Canada it's like 3.5%. So all this money is just sitting there being hoarded. Right. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of philosophies and language we got to shift.
Oh man, we could have a whole conversation about that and all of the ways that our language like reinforces that concentration of power. And yeah, I hear you on there's enough money to go around. Like tell that to any hardworking fundraiser and they will probably either hit you or laugh, but it definitely doesn't feel like that when you're beating the pavement.
Yeah.
So Vu, tell us a bit about the genesis of Nonprofit AF, and particularly why you decided to make racial equity and racial justice a focus of your work.
Nonprofit AF started because a funder actually asked me to write this blog. And I thought, oh man, a funder asked, I can't say no.
I didn't
So
know
they're like, Vu, can you write a blog post from a grantee's perspective? And we're gonna publish it on a website. Of course, now knowing what I know, I'd be like, yeah, how much are you paying me in my organization to do this? Right. But back then I didn't have that lens yet. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll do this. You've been supporting, and they're a really great funder. So I didn't mind doing it. And it was a great partnership. So that started, and then it spun off on its own. And I think what started as just a humorous take on the nonprofit sector, as it became more and more read by people in the field, I thought, I have the privilege, and I should be using it to highlight some of the things that may be more challenging to talk about. I feel like those of us who have a platform and some privilege should be using it. Yeah, to talk about difficult subjects and bring it to people's attention.
Well, you certainly don't shy away from those difficult topics, Vu. So, yes.
I'm just waiting to be canceled. Because I talk about a bunch of stuff that I think would normally get people canceled. I'm like, progressive funders are horrible and ineffective. Look at conservative funders. They've been so effective. And we joke that like progressive funders come to a knife fight with a spreadsheet. And this is it. This is what's been happening. And it's been rampant while we keep saying that we are focused on racial equity, while funders keep saying this. The reality is that the funding and the practices have not been aligned.
Right. They don't reinforce that message. They don't walk the talk.
Yes.
So before we get into some of the things that you feel like in some version of the future might get you cancelled, which I sincerely hope never happens, let's just talk about community-centric fundraising, because that is the other organization that you are a very large part of right now. You're a co-leader of community-centric fundraising, where from what I have observed, there are really hard questions and topics that you are frequently tackling as a community, like things like, is there even a way to change the nonprofit system from within, or is it just totally impossible? These aren't easy questions to face, to dissect, to think about when your livelihood is involved in this sector. They're scary questions to ask. But I think what is particularly important for us to talk about is that you're not only raising and intellectually discussing challenging issues, right? You're also, the community-centric fundraising community is tackling them practically too. And as an illustration of that, I was really impressed to hear about the move CCF founder leaders are taking to relinquish power and pass it on to a global council soon. And it's just like an amazing example of how we can all examine how we can share or relinquish power that we might have. So can you share a little bit about how that decision was made and perhaps what you're learning about power transfer or shared power structures?
Yeah, thanks, Jessamyn. Let me talk a little bit about community-centric fundraising for folks who may not be familiar with it.
Thank you.
Community-centric fundraising started a few years ago, but it's been based on a lot of philosophies and feedback from lots of leaders, especially women of color from decades now, who have not been very happy with the way that fundraising has been done. And fundraising in our sector has been focused on two things. One is ensuring that rich, mostly white donors are feeling comfortable and they're treated like heroes. And then 2 is to get as much money for your own organization as possible. Screw everyone else in the sector, right? We don't say this out loud, but that is what fundraising has been grounded on. And it's been driving away lots of people of color, fundraisers of color. It's been perpetuating white sort of saviorism and poverty tourism, where we have Black and brown kids and families being paraded around just to like move people's, tug at their heartstrings so they can give to these causes. And a lot of fundraisers of color and I got together and said, you know, we have to do this differently. We can't just keep perpetuating the very injustice that we're raising money to fight in the first place. So that was how community-centric fundraising, the formal movement, was founded, and it's been going really well. I think it's been incredible. It's been spreading across the United States and then other countries as well. And so there's like, I think probably about 100 different local chapters who are examining the principles of fundraising, which is, you know, there are 10 of them, and it's like ground fundraising and racial equity work. That means we have to start thinking about talking to our donors about where their wealth came from and so on. It's about ending the hunger games so that we're not just raising money for our own, but like thinking about other missions out there, maybe supporting them, maybe declining funding because a Black-led or Indigenous-led organization may need that money more, right? So the movement has been going great. Now, the transfer of sort of power it's been really cool to see this, and also very challenging, right? Because this is not how we've been built. The founding group decided, you know, we're mostly from Seattle, and if this is going to be a movement, a global movement, it can't just be led by people from one geographic area, and especially a geographic area with so much privilege as Seattle is, right? So we decided that if this is going to be a global movement, then we need to start figuring out how to get leaders from across the states and across the world to be in power, to have some of the influence here in making, sort of setting, because it is a movement though. It is hard, right? Because there's really no power, it's distributed, right?
Right.
I think that the body is not a governing body, it's more like a community center, I would say, right? Where people can go and explore, but they can come back and kind of share their ideas, and someone has to maintain that center for people. But it shouldn't be a gatekeeping body, right? So, but it's hard because we're so used to this hierarchical model.
Yeah.
And we thought about doing things like maybe we should elect some leaders, but then we thought, well, who are the people who are going to be electing? Because if it's like the sort of like fundraisers in general, it will mostly be white women, right, who will be electing, right? So we had to be very thoughtful about doing this, and it's been fun and challenging.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds both of those things, like unequivocally fun and extremely challenging. But I really, really applaud you and all of those involved in supporting this process. It is absolutely fascinating to hear about, and very, very cool that you have so quickly, because it's a very new organization as well, very quickly pivoted and reflected on how our decision makers, or our guiding opinions and perspectives, how are they represented by the entirety of our stakeholders? And can you just imagine if like foundations all asked that question, right? If the foundations a couple of years into being created were like, wait a second, all of the people on our board are from this one area, but we fund globally. Like that, oh my gosh, that would be incredible if that was a requirement, but alas, it's not. But very, very cool to hear you're doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Jessamyn. I do think that family foundations should be considering this. I think that there needs to be some sort of like reflection on family foundations parts where they're like, you know what? We shouldn't be just focused on, like, this can't be just a hobby for our family. Like, this is not, right? The work of justice and equity can't just be either therapy or a hobby or a family bonding experience for people. Right.
Yes, or even a responsibility that people didn't ask for, you know? Like if people are involved for reasons that, you know, might be detrimental towards the way that decisions are made that affect other people's lives, then like there's definitely something we all need to be questioning about that. So again, we could spend a whole conversation talking about that, but I would love to get to something else. So one of the more controversial approaches to influencing philanthropy that you've taken is the crappy funding practices hashtag. So for anybody who's not familiar with this is where people anonymously send VU harmful behavior that they see in the funding world. And then VU shares those practices publicly on Twitter, directly addressing and tagging the foundation in question. And it is fascinating. So your work as a whole really spans the spectrum between like carrot and stick driven approaches. And this is very much on the sticky end, right? You are like, this isn't working. And I'm sure you've upset a few people. But please tell us a bit about how the hashtag approach came about. Like, are you seeing it change behaviors? And how do you really think about shame-based versus reward-based approaches in changing philanthropy in our funny little world that is funding?
The hashtag came about actually at the beginning of the pandemic when people were sending me, I mean, over the years, I get lots of emails like, I can't believe this funder did this and this is, right? And some of it is just really annoying, like asking for 10 copies of a 40-page proposal is ridiculous in any circumstance. But during the pandemic, we still had funders requiring copies to be delivered to the office, right? And this was no longer annoying, it was life-threatening for people. And so I was like, I thought, you know, this funder's like protection from being embarrassed does not outweigh the lives of people who could be infected because of their horrible policies requiring copies to be literally delivered to their office during a pandemic. So I started calling them out, and then it's been kind of going from there. Is it effective? It's probably one of the more effective things, honestly, right? I don't know how to measure this, right? But I feel like no one really tells funders the truth because of the power differentials. We can't really just say, you know what, that is ridiculous. Why are you asking for a quarterly report for a $5,000 grant? That makes no sense whatsoever. People are afraid to, so we just put up with it. And so funders, I think some of them actually do want to change if they can get the feedback, but they can't because of the funder, the power dynamics. And then there's some funders who know that they're doing this, but they realize they're untouchable because no one's going to call them out publicly for this. And so the crappy funding hashtag, crappy funding practices hashtag is just to really kind of restore a little bit of the power imbalance here. And I do think that this causes some funders to wake up because I think some of them are like afraid of being called out publicly, right? Because their reputation is probably the one thing that they do value. Mm-hmm. And being loved and being respected is something that a lot of funders, but it's oftentimes it's not the truth. Right? Yeah. So I don't know. I think I'm going to continue doing this. And I feel like those of us who have more power and privilege again in a platform should be using this. Yes, I probably burned a few bridges by now. But I think that's, if we're going to talk about racial equity or just equity in general, then I think some of us need to be thoughtful about what we're willing to give up, what bridges we're willing to burn, so that we can actually achieve this vision for a more equitable world.
That's really, really interesting. I find it fascinating and just like very interesting to see how funders react to actually having some public accountability to the way that their actions affect nonprofits, because this is like not something any funder is used to, right? To your point about language, to your point your points about power as well, like funders our behavior as funders, and I include myself in this as having run a foundation for more than a decade, our behavior is so rarely questioned. And even when it is questioned, there's like a massive filter that's put in front of it, where it's the feedback is couched in kindness and, you know, just like, I can understand why this might be, or this must be really difficult for you, or, you know, there's like an overabundance of empathy that is put around any feedback in order to make sure that the risk is minimized for whichever brave nonprofit is trying to give the feedback. And this approach is, I haven't really seen anything like it. You know, we see, well, we see like, you know, things, people talk about, you know, Grant Advisor, and you and I, you know, have both been involved in that project, and it's amazing what's happening there. There is actually feedback coming in from nonprofits on foundation practices. And then there's like, you know, the grantee perception report that CUP runs, also another source of anonymized feedback. But to have it be so pointed and public and free as well, and not controlled by the foundation either, is extraordinary. So I continue to watch. You're very intrigued to see how things change, but yeah, I hope people start to realize that this shouldn't be a burning bridges exercise, right? We're all doing this together. We all need to help each other get better. This is not an us versus them, you versus me, like I'm trying to tear you down. This is a, how do we rebuild this sector in a way that works better for our common goals?
Yeah, thanks, Jessamyn. Yeah, I think you're right. I think because we've been so used to the sort of using language, softening our language and so on, that we're not able to be honest. And you're right. I mean, I say stuff like, but I don't think I say anything with burning bridges. I'm not insulting people's mothers on Twitter or something, right? I'm just like, if you require a board chair signature for your grant application, that's crappy funding practices. Yeah. A and B foundation, like, stop doing that. You know, like, if you require a budget form and it has to use your own chart of account, and that forces the nonprofit to translate from their chart of account to your chart of account, that's crappy funding practices, right? That's not a personal insult to anyone here. Right. It's just that you're doing some crappy stuff and you need to change. It's a behavior thing. Change your behavior.
Yeah. Can we have these conversations as professionals? Okay, so Vu, whether it is things that you have gleaned from your work with crappy funding practices or nonprofit AF or community-centric fundraising, if funders listening today walked away with just one or two actions in mind that would directly move philanthropy towards a place of demonstrated racial equity and racial justice, what would you urge those funders to do?
One is to increase the payout rates significantly and give multi-year unrestricted general operating funds to Black, Indigenous, POC-led organizations that are on the forefront, especially those organizations that are working on democracy and protecting democracy. Yeah, I think a lot of funders are just in denial, saving for a rainy day when it is pouring on our communities right now. Like, what are you saving for? It's like you have all of this water and everything is on fire, and you're like, you know what? I'm just gonna use 5% of the water I have to put out these fires because I'm saving the 95% for future fires. Well, guess what? The future fires are caused by the existing fires you don't put out. And the more you don't put them out, the more they're gonna keep spreading. And then you're like, well, see, this is why we gotta keep saving, because there's gonna be fires in the future. You never put them out in the first place. Right. So I think that this denialism, this sort of like, I don't know what else would take to wake up some of the funders here. Everything is on fire. I know, like, I mean, like literally in some parts with the climate change, everything, there's just been more and more wildfires everywhere, not just in the United States, but in Australia, everywhere. We're going to have climate refugees. Like democracy is under attack. There's just like right-wing factions gaining power everywhere, and rights are being curbed. Like this is like the most horrific period, in terms of like rolling back rights in a while. And like the funders who are just kind of like, nah, because they are protected in this bubble of privilege. Most foundation trustees don't have much lived experience or any recent lived experience in what's been going on. And so them setting all these strategies and it's been a mess. And I don't know how to get people to just be like, wake up. You're saving for a future that would not exist for anyone except rich white men at this point.
Somewhere in space, if Jeff Bezos has his way. Thank you, Vu. I appreciate your energy around advocating for bigger spend outs and just like a completely different mindset to how philanthropy is carried out. One that is, not driven by unnecessary urgency, but a very real understanding of the urgency that these problems are causing for millions of people across the world today. So I appreciate the rant. Thank you. I love a good rant. Let's end by reflecting on the future. If your dreams were realized for reform in philanthropy and funders took these steps, they're spending a lot more and they're not hoarding the water for a rainy day. Describe how you think things would look different for communities of color, let's say in like 25 years from now.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jessamyn. I feel like I'm so focused on everything that's wrong that sometimes I don't stop to think about, wow, what is the future that we're working towards? I would love a future where maybe philanthropy is not so necessary because we have been investing enough in policy changes so that rich people are paying their fair share of taxes. And we, the nonprofit sector, is not just responding to them hoarding all this money. And, we are conscience laundering or charity washing all of the injustice that's caused by like all of these terrible policies, right? Also, like voting rights would be protected. Sorry, y'all. And also we would have more progressive women elected into political offices. And we would have a whole bunch of things that are under threats that would not be. Like we still have like this whole abortion thing that is just really devastating. It's still under attack. It's just constantly under attack because it hasn't been codified into law. We still have like Citizens United in the United States, which literally says that a corporation has the same rights as a human being. And so they can donate as much money as possible. The political, it's just out of control, right? And I want us to have a world where we don't need philanthropy so much because people are taking care. Government is strong and representative of its people and has the resources to put policies into place. I kind of want us to be like Denmark, actually. So I think many of us would love to just be like the Scandinavian countries. And yeah, so this is kind of what we're looking towards. I mean, I think we still will need nonprofits in certain ways. We'll still need the arts and cultural organizations. We still need nonprofits that fill particular niches that, that maybe government can't take care of on a large scale. But like certain things like homelessness or food insecurity or poverty, those things should just be gone because we have taken care of the root causes of them.
Right. Yes. And I love where you started with just the idea that maybe philanthropy wouldn't be necessary or perhaps wouldn't even be possible because wealth hoarding, like the accumulation of such massive amounts of wealth might not be possible if we have a truly representative government, if we have truly representative people in the seats of power. So thank you for painting that picture. More women of color and power. I like that, of course. Vu, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. You are a voice for many fundraisers, nonprofit professionals, and also foundation professionals out there who are really trying to change things. And I know that many, many people really appreciate you using your platform to highlight whether it's inequities or injustices, but just highlighting what we can do differently, right? None of this is impossible. We can do this together. Viewers, if you would like to check out any more of Vu's work or his writing as well, please go to nonprofitaf.com or communitycentricfundraising.org. And please also do check out the Capital Collaborative Program by Camelback Ventures. So this is a program that Camelback Ventures runs that helps white funders deepen their commitment and efforts to advance racial equity and racial justice through their work in philanthropy and impact investing. And we're accepting applications now for our upcoming cohort program. You can find out more online at camelbackventures.org. That is all we have time for today. But Vu, thank you so much for being here, for your passion, energy, zeal, and bringing your soapbox.
Thank you, Jessamyn.
Of course. And thanks to everybody for tuning in and listening too.